Hello, and welcome to the Varietal Show. My name is Rory, and you are on the Varietal Literature YouTube channel, which is, of course, a place where Vancouver writers have themselves some good fun writing. If you have never been here before, and you are not watching it live, I'm live for me right now, and you're not watching it live, though, just know that everything I'm about to say, there's going to be timestamps down in the description, so if you want to jump ahead and see how things look and just want to see the stories at the end or whatever else, you are welcome to do that. But onward and upward, what we're doing tonight is we're going to be using some dice, specifically D12s. We're going to try and create some monster, just a little bit of prose that introduces stupid new Halloween monsters. And if you want to help me out with that, you can join in on the live chat where there's already people talking to me. So I'm going to get to it ASAP. And you can give your own contributions. You can make your own versions of these monsters. You can make your own prose. If you put it up there and it's not shockingly horrible or racist or something, I will read it out. And then in the end, we usually come up with about 2 or 3 things for the course of about 45 minutes to an hour, and we just basically enjoy writing. And I see Big Drew has already responded to the opening picture, which is an amazing stock photo, if you didn't notice, of a man wearing a pumpkin on his head and wearing a leather jacket and trying to look as cool as possible. I call him Leather Daddy Pumpkin Man. And Big Drew says in a haunting and sinister voice, oh dear, I gotta do a line read. Do you know the Pumpkin Man? The Pumpkin Man, the Pumpkin Man. Do you know the Pumpkin Man who lives on Slasher Lane? It carries on, but I'm not going to keep doing the voice. The Witcher sat in the corner of her cell, rocking back and forth while cackling madly. Yes, my pretty, you'll do just fine, she hissed under her breath. And Gia says, good evening, and hi, Big Drew. And Big Drew says, even in the afterlife, Don Vito was not to be trifled with, yet a vendetta and a score to settle with Chui Yamamoto of the 3-7 and Trigger Finger that itched more than ever. I think he's starting his own prose there. Okay, I'll show you everything that we're going to work with to make our own little Halloween monsters and stuff, but yeah. That's where we're at so far. I'm going to actually bump this down just a bit. Okay, we're going to do one more thing before we get on to litgames, though. We're going to do Left on Red. Left on Red is where I make recommendations. Why is this not sized right? Let me size this right. Where I give recommendations for like books and movies and video games and TV shows that I think represent sort of good narrative and would be worth your time. And mine is pretty straightforward. It's not even hard to find. It's actually a series that is on Disney Plus right now, which is Andor. Now, I realize not everybody's a huge Star Wars fan, and I wouldn't even say I'm that big of a Star Wars fan, but Andor has the best writing I have seen in a show so far this year. It's written by the guy who wrote the first 3 Bourne movies, and the one who wrote Rogue One, which is this series is based in that same world. It's kind of a prequel to Rogue One. If you've seen Rogue One, you know why it's a prequel. But Andor is, everyone I've ever talked to who's been watching it, it's just been like, why is this so much better than anything else? Like, it is shockingly well written. Just watch those first 3 episodes. You'll know if it's for you. But 100% full-on recommend for its story and its narrative structure and how it intertwines its characters and its clear motivations and its interesting structures and humanized characters. I highly, highly recommend you guys give Andor a shot. Which takes us back to the Varietal show. So,
specifically, that's going to take us all the way over to, pardon me, lit games. Lit games stands for literature games. In other words, it's games we play with stories and so on. And tonight, what we're going to use is a little chart, which I will show you right now. This chart is a rolling 3 rolling tables, technically, sort of squished together, of a 12-sided dice. 12-sided dice, if you've never seen them, they look like this. I have several 12-sided dice because I'm a dork who plays tabletop games. But what we're going to do is I'll explain this slowly because I realize it's a little strange. We're going to do some classic, cliched horror monster first scene of the movie kind of things. And here's what I mean. Like the couple making out on the bluffs. You know, the 1950s, like radio drama. Oh, Johnny. And they're in like the old Cadillac and something's creeping up towards them. And when we get to the point, so chat, I'm looking for some like recommendations of some real classic first scene of a monster movie kind of stuff that I can write a little prose around. And when we get to the point that the monster appears, we are going to roll 3 of these dice, and that's going to give us our prompts for what our monster is. So let's just give it a shot now to see what we come up with. The first one is a 5, which is bullied. The second one is a 2, which is interdimensional. And the third one is a 1, which is vermin. So, like, for example, the first monster would be bullied interdimensional vermin. I see Big Drew shouting nihilistic interdimensional dragon. And then, yeah, once we know what we want to do with our... GS says April Fool's Day, very campy B movie from the 80s, I think. Yeah, actually, I do know April Fool's Day. But like, give me some classic monster intro scenes. So just for the hell of it, so that people know what I'm talking about, because I know sometimes this can be a little hard to follow. I'm going to just use the one I just recommended. I'm gonna have the George and Jenny were just in time to catch the last withering violet rays of a fading dusk. Jenny turned off the engine and said, "Now, George." Why did everyone talk like that in those days? Somebody from those days, tell me. Did people talk in that bubbly voice that they always do? Jenny turned off the engine and said, "Now, George, we can't be out here too late. My mom wants her car back by 9:30. Oh, heck, Jenny. George smiled from his round and rosy cheeks. Maybe it was, I see, not that I remember from GS. Maybe it was just a thing that, like, Grease started because she had that iconic voice. Don't go worrying about your old lady. Let's get those gams out. Well, we still got the light. Gams is like one of my all-time favorite like nonsense slangs that I don't think anybody actually said. So they rustled as young couples do on the leather bench seats of her mother's old Ford. But as the night drew around them like a veil, obstructing more and more from their eyes and turning the tree line into something heard but unseen. It was heard more and more. Did you hear that, George? Why am I doing the voices? I don't have to do the voices, but I am. Jenny said, pushing up for air. From his clumsy kisses. Ah, heck, Jenny. It's just some damn squirrels. George said as the chilling air crackled with something in the brush. That's awful big for just a squirrel, don't you think? Jenny said. George was annoyed, and so he crawled into the front seat. To turn on the headlights. I guess if it settles you down, let me show you. Nothing is there. Then he turned on the lights. And before him was... Now we gotta roll. So now we gotta go back to our monster chart. And we have a 6, which is a sadistic, another 6, which is spined, and a 12, which is man. Was a massive, distorted blob of a man sprung with great spines tipped blood red who chuckled and eyed George. With a sadistic glare. Oh my gosh! George! Screamed Jenny. It's the sadistic spined man. The Porcuslasher. That they were gabbing about. Big Drew picked up on that too. A porcupine. I just don't trust him. That they were gabbing about on the radio. All right. Now, chat. Now that we have our introduction, what does the Porcuslasher do? Now, how are we going to enrapture our audience and sell them on our new Halloween monster, the Porcuslasher? I see Big Drew's been writing some stuff, so while you guys in chat, this is where you come in, let me know, I don't know, like, do you think they get away? Do we want to kill them? Give me all your ideas. I see Holly says, house says, what have I walked into? Hello, Holly's house. We are, well, I mean, you've just seen it. We're doing like classic horror introductions, like in slasher flicks. But then right when we get to the point of the monster, we're going to roll dice for this table. Which I'll show you right here. For this table here that has 3 columns and 12 options, and we're going to roll it to figure out our potential monsters. And then, yeah, and then we're going to talk through creating a new monster. Big Drew says, teenage boy befriended by a scientist who's Scientist who's on? Is that what it's trying to say? The run for stealing plutonium goes back in time to save his parents' relationship. Oh, you're talking about Back to the Future. Okay, so it's Back to the Future. Although at some point I did see Bionic Vampire Marmosets from the Cramb Nebula. I like it. He was just really good at butchering already unalived pigs. Oh, the Porcuslasher? Well, he's got spines. But the thing I don't understand, like, spines are a defensive thing. So how are we going to make spines work as an attack? I can think of at least, like, the first thing he'll do. Okay. George fumbled to put the car in gear and knocked the keys right out of the ignition. The Porcuslasher squealed its trademark squeal and belly flopped on the car. A terrible grinding and whining came from the engine as the smiling spined man slowly let his spines sink into the vehicle, rendering it dead. Oh, hey, Spencer's here. Hello, Spencer. The spines are projectiles, says Big Drew. I like that. Spencer says, I imagine the Porky Slasher to be some weird being with a bag of spines, like human spines, and he just tosses them at people like dry bones in Mario. I love it. Okay. You guys both kind of had the same idea. He ejects them. So he disables the car by belly flopping. Good glory and Lord's mercy. I don't know why he's like Tennessee now. Good glory and Lord's mercy. What was her name? Jenny? Yeah, it was Jenny. Good Lord and Lord's mercy. Good glory and Lord's mercy, Jenny. We are going to have to skedaddle like the Dickens. He screamed with bulging eyes, widened in fear. I don't know why it makes me laugh so hard, but it really makes me laugh to be like seriously understating, undercutting the drama with this fake cursing. Jenny had already swung the door open and ran into the woods. Big Drew got a kick out of skedaddle like the Dickens. As the heaving monstrosity squealed and pulled itself free of the hood, George, a track star in his own right, sprinted not far behind Jenny. A local hermit would later report hearing a voice crying out, "Skedaddle! Jens! Skedaddle! Till there ain't no Dickens left." But then it cut short. Oh, I didn't realize I didn't size this up right. Just give me a second here. There we go. We're gonna make another monster, so I'm gonna wrap this up. George was found punctured through and pinned to an old oak. when the local kids noticed their swimming hole was tinted a terrible shade of red the next morning. His pale body was held aloft by a 4-foot spine surely shot by the Porcuslasher. Okay, that's probably good enough for this. Let's do Monster 2. Okay, chat. So what I need from you guys is another like classic setup. So like we're just kind of doing the intro scenes of monsters here. And then when we get to the monster, we'll again roll the dice, use the table, figure out what our monster is. This was a sadistic spined man, I think was what it came out. And that was done as like the cliff. Big Drew says, wait, what's the Porcufellow's motivation? We didn't do much development there. Take it up with 80s slashers tropes, man. The hell was anybody's motivation? The only one I actually remember is Freddy, because Freddy was a really solid one. Freddy's like an old folktale is what Freddy is. But you know, like the rest of them, it's just sort of like bullied or whatever. Or it's just a psychopath. Okay, so Monster 2. What I need is a setup. So we did the like couple making out in a car on a bluff. What's another like classic horror, like 20th Century Fox has come across the screen. It's just faded away, and we're fading into that first shot that's going to introduce it. You know, the other one that comes to mind for me is Scream, because like the introduction to Scream is a real classic. You get Drew Barrymore, who's like this famous actress at the time, so you assume she's going to survive, which is, I don't think really works anymore because everyone knows it, but at the time, you had no idea. She was in the trailer too, as I recall. And she's in her house, and she gets this threatening call and starts to feel quite vulnerable and then gets killed. Like, so being alone, you know, like kind of babysitter alone in a house Halloween thing, that's another classic opener. Big Drew says, loner on a road trip picks up a hitchhiker. So just keep in mind though, Drew, we're going to have to roll for what that is. So like when they pull up, we won't know what that hitchhiker is going to look like until we roll it. So just keep that in mind. Do we have any recommendations on the characters? Like the first thing that comes to mind with picking up a hitchhiker, is that like it's two people in a car who are arguing about it. Like one of them's like, where's your sense of adventure? And the other one's like, my God, man, it's a stranger. But is there any other dynamic you guys want to go with? Oh, I see Holly's House is bringing some facts. Freddy was based on the true case studies of what was then called sudden Asian death syndrome. Asian death syndrome. Among Hmong refugees in 1970s, particularly the case of a 12-year-old boy who had nightmares of something chasing him and refused to sleep and then died during a nightmare. Oh, cool. I mean, not cool in that it's true, but it's cool that there is a basis for the story, I guess. Well, GS, I see that, you know, Big Drew has more than once requested the loner on a road trip, so I'll just go with my first instinct then. We'll have the two people in the house. Big Drew says, could Flip It and our created character as the driver? That is the premise of a movie I watched. What the hell was it? This is back like 15 or so years ago. It's a truck driver. Yeah, sure, why not? They'll have them walking down the side of the street. When we get to a phone, and I don't need you to protect me from bears, I am literally Jorge, said, pausing to hold his fingers as if he were about to prick Leonard with a pin. Going to actually kill you. Shut up, Leonard. Do you think I'm any happier about walking along the roadside in the middle of the night? Leonard cut himself off, seeing the headlights of a large truck approaching. He jogged and held out his thumb, waving and shouting. But the truck carried on. If anything, it seemed to Jorge to speed up. See? I told you. You're wasting your time. They're gonna think we're bandits. Jorge shouted after him. And yes, I am literally going to kill you. Because what did I say before we left in your crappy old Honda? It doesn't matter now. Big Drew says, ooh, our character is driving like a maniac and taking out pedestrians along the way before deciding to stop and pick someone up for some real fun, as he describes it. I mean, he's got to be a monster. Like, he's probably not going to be a man, because we're going to roll those dice, right? So, I don't know. We'll see what it looks like. How about that? And if he fits that, like, if he's like an interdimensional swarm of something, well then, you know, how's it going to talk? It doesn't matter now. Jorge. No. Lenny muttered. Oh, but it does matter. Wait, look. Jorge pointed ahead. There was a car at the side of the road with its turn signal blinking. Did you even see that one pass? Lenny shook his head. but jogged ahead. To try and get to it before it left. I see Leonard, I almost called you Leonard. Big Drew has given me my next line here. Caught up to the open door, and he began to speak. But Jorge saw Lenny's mouth fall agape upon first glance of what was in the cab. All right. Time to roll the open dice. Coming out of the car was a... Alright, we've got an 11. So let's go back to our little sheet real quick. See what we got. Got an 11, which is a torturous. Got another 11, which is poison. And then we've got a 6, which is an aberration. So this one's a little more open. A torturous, poisonous aberration. Torturous. Poisoned. Aberration. Well, what do we think it looks like, chat? No other words could describe it. I'm feeling that, Spencer. Lots of tentacles. So are these going to be like those tendril tentacles that have spines on them or something? Because we did just do the spines. Or are these going to be like slimy? Spencer says maybe wearing a top hat. I like that. Big Drew says looks like Casper's Uncle Fatso got J. I got you up to J. I don't know what J means. Wearing a top. Okay. The first of its fuming, slimy, tentacles reached out and wrapped themselves around, not reached, sprung. Sprung out and wrapped themselves around Lenny's head, ending their grasp like so. many fingers pressing down his screaming throat. It oozed and slipped out of the vehicle through its transparent flesh. I could just see the shadowy remains of some unfortunate bodies still struggling weakly. I could see. I switched perspectives. I just realized that Jorge could see. Jorge could see. Jorge assumed it was the family that had been in the car. As its last bit of terrible sweating flesh reeking of poisonous gas popped free, Jorge could just discern a polite top hat in its silhouette. Whether it was lodged there from another victim, like so much chicken in between the teeth, or whether this violent green slime had a classic sense of fashion, Jorge could not determine. Big Drew says, can he be dressed up to the nines? Tuxedos, tails, top hat, wings. So, but just this amorphous bloss of slimy glue and a tux. Sure. The lower tentacles tapped onto the road in expensive black leather wingtips. And the last tentacles danced on the breeze behind it, though they may have been the tails of a classic tails, not that kind of tails. The tails of a classic tuxedo. Jorge was much too terrified to determine in that dim light. The creature dangled Lenny and dropped him into his great smacking maw. Cracking bones as he did. The Lenny's cries revealed he was still very much alive. The creature turned towards Jorge, and it seemed his day could get no worse. And definitely not better. On its way to a gala, says Spencer. Big Drew says, I like the idea of a gooey blob monster trying to look sophisticated while committing murder. I mean, I'm all open for art. I'm love fan art. On its way to the Met Gala. As the creature pulled its tentacles away from its mouth, cleaning them with a few terrible slurps, it growled in a terrible guttural, flapping, wet noise.
You, sir, what way to the Met Gala? I am very late.
Jorge pointed, and the terrible, poisonous, man-eating, heartless blob of a monster squeezed back into the car. Ducking down to let its top hat through the door and drove away to where such monsters roam. Spencer's laughing at that. The long lost Kardashian. Not that lost. All right. And I drink some water and we'll read back our two stories. See if we did a good job. Because we know we didn't. GS says you're gifted at blob voices, Rory. I feel like I could commit more. All right. If you're coming to this section of the show, you might be skipping ahead just to hear the stories. So we wrote two stories, again, based on rolling D12 dice on a rolling table. And what we got, for example, for the first one was a sadistic spined man as the monster. And then from there, we sort of created a situation We didn't know what the monster was till it appeared, but we tried to use some classic horror introductions to like an old radio play of a horror creature. So here we go, scene 1 from the radio play, The Sadistic Spined Man. George and Jenny were just in time to catch the last withering violet rays of a fading dusk. You know what? I gotta put on the horror music. It's not right without it. You guys know. You guys know. Okay. See? Perfect. Already, this show 10 times better. George and Jenny were just in time to catch the last withering violet rays of a fading dusk. Jenny turned off the engine and said, "Now, George, we can't be out here too late. My mom wants the car back by 9:30. "Oh, heck, Jenny," George smiled from his round and rosy cheeks. "Don't go worrying about your old lady. Let's get those gams out while we still got the light." So they rustled as young couples do on the leather bench seats of her mother's old Ford. But as the night drew round them like a veil, obstructing more and more from their eyes, and turning the tree line into something heard but unseen, it was heard more and more. "Did you hear that, George?" Jenny said, pushing up for air from his clumsy kisses. "Aw, heck, Jenny, it's just some damn squirrels," George said as the chilling air crackled with something in the brush. "That's awful big for just a squirrel, don't you think?" Jenny said. George was annoyed, and so he crawled into the front seat to turn on the headlights. "I guess if it settles you down, let me show you nothing is there." Then he turned on the lights, and before him was a massive, distorted blob of a man, sprung with great spines, tipped blood red, who chuckled and eyed George with a sadistic glare. "Oh my gosh, George," screamed Jenny. "It's the Sadistic Spine Man." There's no good read of that line. "The pork you slasher that they were gabbing about on the radio." George fumbled to put the car in gear and knocked the keys right out of the ignition. Oh, heck. The porcupine slasher squealed its trademark squeal, and belly flopped on the car as its spines drove down. A terrible grinding and whining from the engine came as the smiling spined man slowly sank into the vehicle, rendering it dead. "Good glory, Lord's mercy, Jenny! We are going to have to skedaddle like the Dickens!" He screamed with bulging eyes widened in fear. Jenny had already swung the door open and ran into the woods, though. As the heavy monstrosity squealed and pulled itself free of the hood, George, a track star in his own right, sprinted not far behind Jenny. A local hermit later would report hearing a voice crying out, "Skedaddle, Jens! Skedaddle till there ain't no Dickens left!" But then it cut short. George was found punctured through and pinned to an old oak when the local kids noticed their swimming hole was tinted a terrible shade of red the next morning. His pale body was held aloft by a 4-foot spine, surely shot by the porcupine slasher. Big Drew said, "How'd that squeal go again? Did it cut out, or was that just a joke about the worst squeal ever made?" Okay, Monster 2, I can't remember. It's something about an aberration that was poisonous and something else. It doesn't matter. When we get to a phone, I don't need you to protect, and sorry, let me start this again. When we get to a phone and I don't need you to protect me from bears, I am literally, Jorge said, pausing to hold his fingers as if he were about to prick Leonard with a pin, going to actually kill you. Shut up, Leonard. Do you think I'm any happier about walking along... Shut up, Jorge. Do you think I'm any happier about walking along the roadside in the middle of the night? Leonard cut himself off, seeing the headlights of a large truck approaching. He jogged and held out his thumb, waving and shouting, but the truck carried on. If anything, it seemed to Jorge to speed up. See? I told you! You're wasting time. They're gonna think we're bandits, Jorge shouted after him. Anyways, yes, I am literally going to kill you because what did I say before we left in your crappy old Honda? Doesn't matter now, Lenny muttered. Oh, but it does matter. Wait, look. Jorge pointed ahead. There was a car at the side of the road with its turn signal blinking. Did you even see that one pass? Lenny shook his head, but jogged onward to try and get to it before it left. He caught up to open the door and he began to speak, but Jorge saw Lenny's mouth fall agape upon first glimpse of what was in the cab. Coming out of the car was a torturous, poison aberration. No other words could describe it, but here are some. The first of its fuming, slimy tentacles sprung out and wrapped themselves around Lenny's head, ending their grasp like so many fingers pressing down his screaming throat. It oozed and slipped out of the vehicle. Through its transparent flesh, Jorge could see the shadowy remains of some unfortunate bodies, still struggling weakly against their digestion. Jorge assumed it was the family that had been in the car, as its last bit of terrible sweating flesh, reeking of poisonous gas, popped free. Jorge could just discern a polite top hat in its silhouette. Whether it was lodged there from another victim, like so much chicken in between the teeth, or whether this violent green slime had a classic sense of fashion, Jorge could not determine. The lower tentacles tapped in onto the road, inexpensive black leather wingtips, and the last tentacles danced on the breeze behind it, though they may have been tails of a classic tuxedo. Jorge was much too terrified to determine that in the dim light, of course. The creature dangled Lenny and dropped him into his great smacking maw and cracked his bones as he did. Though Lenny's cries revealed he was still very much alive when it began to eat him. The creature turned towards Jorge, and it seemed his day could get no worse, and definitely not better. As the creature pulled its tentacles away from its mouth, cleaning them with a few terrible slurps, it growled in a terrible, guttural, flapping, wet voice. You, sir... What way to the Met Gala? I am very late. Jorge pointed, and the terrible poisonous man-eating heartless blob of a monster squeezed back into the car, ducking down to let its top hat through the door, and drove away to where such monsters roam. The two Leonards hitchhiking in the night, yeah. It's amazing how much, like, when you're typing along, how much you, like, misspell and use homonyms and stuff. Spencer says, really good voice acting, Rory. Well, thank you, Spencer. GS also liked it. Victor said that was some pretty great gnashing of teeth. Alright. Well, we created monsters, and I think they're as timeless as any monster ever conceived. Let's put back on the fun music. If you do like voice acting, that I do, you should know that I do. Every Tuesday night at 6:30, I read folktales and fairy tales, and this month, obviously... Oh, that's the wrong stuff. That's the fairy tale stuff. every Tuesday at 6:30, and we're doing all this month horror stories. And this month we did a horror story, or sorry, this week we did a horror story that was featuring lesser known female writers from the 50s who wrote some great horror stories that have a lot of really cool feminist symbolism in them, but are in and of themselves really inventive and effective horror stories. I recommend you guys check them out. The first one's kind of shorter, and just like this show, you can go down to the description in those videos and jump ahead to the beginning of where whatever story interests you starts. There's one about a tower there in Italy that a woman sort of feels attracted to go up. It's very narrow stairs. And then there's another about two guys on a boat who pick up a strange girl. But if you really want to spook, the last week on Tuesday on Fireside Fairy Tales, I read a story. I mentioned this last week as well. I read a story called The Boy Who Went with the Fairies, and that still stands as the scariest story I've ever read. So I highly recommend that one. Big Drew says, good times, Rory. Thanks for starting my vacation off with some fun. Oh, I am so glad that you're starting a vacation, Big Drew. What a great time to have a vacation, too. And thank you so much for dropping by, Spencer. It was a nice surprise. And GS, always thank you so much for keeping me company here. You guys, don't have to go home. But as always, you can't stay here because I got to go cash out. Get out of my shop.